Hello everyone, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Adrian Lloyd, this is just my stupid opinion. Alright, we got a few different stories coming at you today. We're going to start off with Justin Trudeau's controversial tax change and all the problems with that. Then we're going to move on to the status of women. They recently tried to nominate a new MP and that got shot down because she was pro-life. So for that very reason, the Liberal government has been trying to deny her to be the opposition status of women's member. So the Liberals are trying to block that. And we're also going to talk about, during question period, Tom Mulcair ended up calling Justin Trudeau out for firing commissioners when under investigation. So we're going to take a look into that. So we got a lot to get to, so let's get right into her. So I'm sure by now most of you have heard about Justin Trudeau wants to do a tax change. And this is to, in his opinion, to plug all the loopholes that the rich take in order to be able to hide their money. But this has all the small businesses up in an uproar because these are the real people who it's going to affect. So this mostly is Justin Trudeau and our finance minister, Bill Morneau's doing. And so what they're looking to propose is, let's look at the overview that has been given. Mr. Morneau announced in the budget back in March that the Liberals have not been pleased with some Canadians who are using corporations in their tax planning, and that changes would be made. The claim is that certain folks are using corporations to pay less than their fair share of taxes. While the proposed changes are meant to affect the wealthy, there will be no shortage of small business owners, the backbone of the Canadian economy, who will be significantly worse off as a result. So the proposal is there's three areas that the government wants to take a look at. And those three are income sprinkling, passive income, and then converting income into capital gains. So we're going to break them down one at a time and we'll see what each one is. So we're going to start off with income sprinkling. So some businesses owners sprinkle income to family members by way of salary or wages or dividends, bonuses, to reduce the family's overall tax burden. There are already rules in place to prevent unreasonable salaries or wages from being paid to family members who are not truly earning the compensation they receive. There are even kiddie tax rules to prevent dividends paid to minors being paid to minor children from being taxed at their lower rates. It would be giving money around to your family in order to hide it, because you're probably getting taxed at a higher bracket and they're not. So you give it to them, and then you keep more of your money. Very commonly used. This is probably mostly going to affect small businesses. Spreading the money around with your family in a small business, well, chances are they're all working for the shop in one form or another, whether it's the front cash or in the back. Whatever, they're pulling their own weight. So now this is going to get looked into and it's going to be seen as unfair because you're sprinkling around with your family and we're going to tax you at a much higher rate than everybody else. And they're saying that they're going to hit them with the kiddie tax. Now, what exactly is the kiddie tax? The kiddie tax applied to children's unearned income. Usually this had to do with interest, investments, and bonuses. But these can also include gifts, prizes, inheritance. And this was up to $2,100 that was untaxed, and then the child would get hit by the kiddie tax. The kiddie tax could be upwards of 39.6%. That's a fair amount, you're taking from a child there. They see it as you trying to give the money away to hide it from your taxes. Which maybe, depending on how old the child is, if we're talking like a 4-year-old, then $2,100. What 4-year-old is $2,100? If it's a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, then that's could be likely if they're. So you can already see where there's going to be problems with this. So what is changing? The government wants to restrict the ability to pay salary or wages or dividends to adult children between the ages of 18 to 24. By extending the kiddie tax rules, formerly called the tax on split income, to them. So now adults who are actually working for their businesses are going to get taxed at this ridiculous rate. And if you kind of look at these ages, 18 to 24, this is also when they're most likely going to be going to school. Most kids, it's either right after high school or they work for a couple of years and then they end up going back. There's a certain point where many kids, if you pass at a certain age, a lot of people will never go back to school. So this is mostly going to affect college-age students who are trying to pay their ridiculously high tuition. Justin Trudeau says he fights for the middle class, but this is actually going to hurt middle-class parents and children who are trying to go to school. The parents trying to send their kids to school, the kid trying to go to school. And also made reference to this tax on split income. So what this is income splitting is a tax planning technique designed to shift income from a taxpayer paying at a high rate to a tax another person in the family unit paying tax at a lower rate, as we already talked about. Unfortunately, there is a number of legislative provisions, attribution rules, and other anti-avoidance measures designed to prevent saving taxes by shifting income between taxpayers. So there's already rules in place to prevent this, but Justin Trudeau seems to think that it's unfair if you're a young adult working at your family business. That's about the perfect time. Many people will continue on and want to take over their family business eventually. Doesn't mean they don't want to go to school, but I mean, it depends on what their family business is. If their family's doctors and they want to take over the practice, then, well, they're going to be going to school for a long time. But meanwhile, while these kids should be making, well, these young adults, I mean, this would actually affect me if I was working for a family business, but I don't. Like if my parents own a family business, but they don't. So I went on the CRA website. I ended up pulling this up. It was the permitted arrangements. It's still a number of legitimate tax planning arrangements that can be used. And I ended up putting these red X's next to the ones that I thought were probably going to get hit by Justin Trudeau's tax plan. That's the invest child tax benefit payment in your child's name. So investing, they've already singled that out. Give cash or other assets to your adult children. Gifts of cash could enable them to maximize their deductible RRSP contributions. This would go with more, again, with the income sprinkling, but also would be related to capital gains. And then finally it has, have your spouse or common law partner and or adult children participate in an incorporated business by owning shares acquired with their own funds, which number one, it says it's their own money that they acquired it with. This would allow company profits to be distributed to them in the form of dividends. And they say participating in an incorporated business. And I gotta admit, I was not actually 100% what an incorporated business actually was before this, so I ended up looking it up. As we can see here, a corporation, another type of business structure is corporation. Incorporation can be done by the federal or provincial territorial level. When you incorporate your business, it is considered to be a legal entity that is separate from its shareholders. As a shareholder of its corporation, it will not be personally liable for the debts, obligation, or acts of corporation. It is always wise to seek legal advice before incorporating. And in here we go. We got all the advantages and disadvantages here. You know, limited liability, ownership transfer. Although it seems like you're underneath a lot more regulation and scrutiny being an incorporated business. That's the one thing about it. So as we can see here, I ended up just wanted to, before we moved on to the next one, just going quickly back to the kiddie tax. As we can see here, already what is in effect is just to be hit by the kiddie tax, you had to make more than $2,100 and you had to be under the age of 18 at the end of 2016, because this is the current one. Age 18 at the end of 16 with earned income that is less than half of the support for the year, or age 19 to 23 at age 16 with earned income that is less than half their support and they are full-time students. But now they just want to extend it. Not only that, they want to extend it to another year to make it 24, but this doesn't have anything to do with whether you go to school or not. They're just going to bang you and hit you with this. As you can see why a lot of middle-class people are probably nervous about this. A lot of small businesses. I mean, why would this sort of thing affect big business? They can afford to weather the storm, but these sort of hits hurt small business time a lot more than it does big. The other thing about big business is it can actually afford to pick up and leave if it wants. And we're going to get to that in a few minutes about big businesses leaving because of Trudeau's tax changes. But let's move on. So with this new income sprinkling tax rules they're putting in place, tax laws, The proposal says it will apply a reasonable test, does not specify anything else besides reasonable test, in quotation marks, that will assess the adult child's contribution to the business, both labor and capital, in determining whether amounts paid to that child should be taxed at his or her normal tax rate or at the highest tax rate possible. So the government decides whether you're putting in enough time into your business. And it says both labor and capital. So how much money you're bringing in, as well as how much of your own time you're dedicating to it. Well, maybe there's one reason or another that you can't do it. And actually, on September 26th, 27th, sorry, my brain's a little not there right now. But on September 26th, September 27th, the Justin Trudeau was in question period inside House of Parliament, and they grilled him pretty hard on these sort of changes as well.
Small business owners are the backbone of the Canadian economy, and they create jobs and countless opportunities in communities all across the country. And nowhere is that more true than in the riding that I have the privilege of representing in Banff Airdrie. But the Prime Minister keeps trying to claim that these small business owners are somehow wealthy tax cheats. And he couldn't be further from the truth. Because we're not talking about the Prime Minister's millionaire friends. We're talking about hard-working, middle-class Canadians. It's the coffee shop down the street. It's the person who cuts your hair. And it's the mechanic who fixes your car. These are the people that the Liberal government is trying to tax right out of business.
Mr. Speaker, over the past month, I've hosted 2 town halls with business people from my riding of Calgary-Mindapore. They are so concerned about the impacts of this attack on small business that they took time away from their family and companies to share with me the shock they feel at that they are being punished for creating new businesses, employing Canadians, and contributing to the economy. Mr. Dunlaw has farmed all his life. These changes will mean it is cheaper for him to sell his family farm than to pass it down to his kids. Dr. Julie Schell is a local veterinarian. Under this unfair tax policy, she would have to lay off employees, cancel new hires, and forget any plans to upgrade her equipment. These people are not the 1%. They are hard-working, middle-class families trying to make a living, which is becoming increasingly difficult under this Liberal government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, I stopped at the local gas station to fill up. Chad is one of the local owners and provides me with updates on the community. But last week was a bit different. He shared with me his thoughts on the proposed Liberal tax changes that impact his family. Chad is the youngest son of Sam and Camilla. Sam and Camilla have owned the local station for over 30 years. Sam is now ill, and for he and his wife, the store and station is their retirement. Sam and Camilla have assisted their children in post-secondary education through their hard work. But now, instead of living their retirement in dignity after working 60 to 70 hours a week for decades, this government is throwing a wrench in their retirement.
So the next thing the government wants to target is passive income. And what passive income is when a corporation generates income, it's eligible for a pretty attractive tax rate, about 15%, but it varies from province, on the first $500,000 federally of an active business income. If a business owner doesn't need all of the earnings to support his lifestyle, it's common to leave the rest of it in a corporation to invest, perhaps in a portfolio or earning passive income. For example, if you earn $100 in active business income and pay $15 of that to the taxman, you have $85 left to invest in the corporation. If you had earned that business income personally and you had the highest tax bracket, a marginal tax rate at about 50%, you'd be left with only $50 to invest. So there's an advantage of earning business income in a corporation if you earn enough that it won't spend it all. So the government is exploring how to limit the perceived benefit of leaving excess earnings inside a corporation to grow a passive portfolio. Mr. Morneau, the finance minister, is looking for comments from Canadians on a couple primary options. One, implementing a refundable tax that would apply an ineligible investment, the tax that would be refunded once the capital is either paid out to you as taxable dividends personally or is used in active business. Or 2, change the current refundable tax system on annual passive income so that the tax is no longer refundable if the investments were made with the excess business income tax at a lower rates. How does all this simplify our tax system? That's a good fucking question. I don't think it does at all. So I'm not 100% whether the actual rate was up to about close to 50% on for the passive income that they could be taxed to. I went looking, but I couldn't find exactly what I was looking for, anything to really confirm or deny that. It's just all buried under bureaucracy, I'm sure. I'm sure it's there, I just didn't find it. Anyway, so take that with a grain of salt. It might not be up to 50%, but we're going to move on. So the last thing that they were wanting to put on is capital gains. So capital gains was a little more... This one kind of, I had to go searching a bit just to kind of figure out exactly what it was. And again, I'm still a little bit confused, but I think I've got it down as to what it is. So this article says, converting income to capital gains. That's the third thing that Trudeau's government wants to target. Is some corporate owners have taken steps to convert what would otherwise be taxed as salary or dividends into capital gains. This has to be done using a complex set of steps involving selling some shares to another company related to the shareholder. The government proposes to close these opportunities by tweaking Section 84.1 of our tax law, which was intended to prevent this type of planning, but doesn't quite do the trick. On this one, I think the changes make sense. That's according to the article. So once I saw capital gains, that was something that I wasn't 100% as to what it was. So I went looking into it, and as I could tell, from what I could tell, capital gains is property. It's capital property, essentially. It seemed to do with a lot of the laws have to do with exchanging property and giving property as a gift. As we can see here under this article, that talks about when you have a capital gain or a capital loss. It has a few different things in here, but I think the main one that's going to get focused on, considering it has to do with business, is probably going to do with property in and of itself. So if we look towards the law that we have in place now, I'm going to quickly go through it, although it says, where after May 22nd, 1985, a taxpayer resident in Canada, other than a corporation, disposes of shares that are capital property of taxpayers, in this section referring to as the subject shares, of any class of the capital stock of a corporation resident in Canada, and they refer to this as the subject corporation, to another corporation, the purchaser corporation, with which the taxpayer does not deal at arm's length, and immediately after the disposition, the subject corporation would be connected. And the subject corporation would be connected with the purchaser corporation. So what the hell does that mean? As I understand it, what this is an individual, most likely a shareholder, I believe, who disposes of property of the taxpayer of a corporation in Canada, because this has to do with being taxpayers' property. And where they dispose this property to another corporation where they are being pressured by third parties, most likely the buying corporation or representatives of them, to act in their own self-interest of both themselves and the purchasing corporation. And where the selling company immediately becomes connected with the buyer company. That part became pretty clear. So that's how I understand it in my own words. That's what this law, that is 84.1, is what they're talking about. It goes on to be much more bureaucracy later on, so I just decided to take this one section of it. As I said, it took me a few minutes to dissect that just to even be able to spit that part out. Friggin' rewrote the whole thing down in my notebook and started dissecting it. It was weird. You shouldn't have to do this just to understand the damn law. It's just all covered in gibberish. So, what's the big deal with these changes? Well, it seems that farmers and doctors especially have been very outspoken about how much they hate this new tax change. And it seems to be that a lot of what they would do would affect, well, at least for farmers especially, it would affect them handing down their business to their family members. And that's generally what ends up happening these days, is that farmers are kept in the family. I mean, who the hell do you know has moved out to a farm and taken up farming? Probably nobody. So now they're worried that doing this is, they're not going to be able to do this anymore. And it was either the 26th or 27th of September, during question period in Parliament Hill, in the House of Commons, Justin Trudeau was getting grilled by the other sides over this. We have a few clips that are covering this.
Business owners use legitimate tools like passive investments to save for things like the future growth and expansion of their operations. And they also use it as a rainy day fund to get them through when times are tough. Now the Liberals want to tax these savings at a rate of up to 73%. So a simple question, when it comes to these increased taxes on passive investments, in the long run, can the Prime Minister tell us exactly how much more revenue the government will collect?
That's right. Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have a system that we inherited from the Conservatives that allows wealthy Canadians to use private corporations as a way of paying lower tax rates than middle-class Canadians. We don't think that's fair. When it comes to passive investments, it's actually interesting, Mr. Speaker, that 2%, the top 2% of private corporations hold 80% of all the passive income in this country. That's wealthy Canadians that we want to make sure pay their fair share in taxes. That's what all Canadians want, Mr. Speaker. That's what we're delivering on.
So, Mr. Speaker, that seems to be a no. He can't tell us exactly how much the government will collect. And what we do know is that when they raised taxes, even on the 1%, that they ended up collecting less revenue. Department officials show that. So what we're learning is that this Liberal government is so incompetent that they can't even raise taxes properly. And a new report confirms that 81% of middle-class families are paying more in taxes under the Liberals. But he admits that his new changes won't touch his own family fortune. So why does it always seem that the Prime Minister's plans are designed to hurt everybody but himself?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, interesting that new report completely overlooked the Canada Child Benefit. We are giving 9 out of 10 Canadian families more money every single month with the high cost of raising their kids. And the way we're doing that is not sending it to wealthy families like the Leader of the Opposition's or mine. We are giving it to the families who need the help. And the way we're doing that is actually having an impact on Canadians right across the country as we're reducing child poverty by 40% in this country. That's what this government sees as important. That's what this government's going to continue to do.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
He doesn't seem to need the child tax benefit, but he sure doesn't mind taking taxpayers' money for government-funded nannies. And the Prime Minister is always out there looking for more because he has a spending problem. And the first step is always to admit that you have a problem. So will the Prime Minister admit that he has a problem and abandon these unfair tax rates?
So as you can see, several different times Justin Trudeau tried that. Well, at first he tried to shift the blame to the Conservatives, talking about the tax policy that he took over, but they are discussing about his current changes to his tax policy. So he's trying to divert blame there away from himself and Bill Morneau. And he ended up, in clear Justin Trudeau fashion, he ended up avoiding all the questions themselves. He ended up even talking about his child benefit package, even though that did not have to do with what is going on. I find that Justin Trudeau seems to be blind as to who the middle class really is, because farmers, even doctors who make, sure, doctors make a good amount of money, but doctors are not rich billionaires. Many doctors are not even multi-millionaires, so to target them as one of this, it seems that Justin Trudeau has really forgotten who the middle class is. I love this from this one article. It says, in one morning about 2 months before the election in 2015, reporters asked Trudeau of his definition of middle class. He couldn't come up with one. He said, quote, "I'm going to let the economists argue over which quintile or decile the middle class begins or ends in," end quote. Trudeau chuckled dismissively. But it is always going to be a problem for Trudeau and his party to promise the moon to the middle class without a definition of who was the middle class. And that's a good point. Because that was one thing he said he'd go to bat for, is he was going to make the rich pay more by a progressive tax because it was only fair. Now he's saying he's doing this in order to help the middle class, and then everyone else is saying you're actually targeting the middle class. So he doesn't even seem to know what the middle class is or seem to remember. And the fact that the government's going to come into somebody's business and dictate whether a family member is contributing enough. If the family is satisfied with their contribution, then they're contributing enough. It's just these small businesses cannot afford this, while the big companies either can afford to take this tax change, or, as stated in this article, they're moving out. And what it says is a big Canadian player has quickly picked up his chips and is heading for the exit amid the tumult over the Trudeau government's controversial tax proposal. A business owner has informed John Manley, the head of an organization representing Canada's largest corporations, that he has moved billions of dollars outside the country since the Liberals formally proposed their tax changes in mid-July. Is anybody surprised? Whenever the government does things like this, it just drives out more business. And he moved billions of dollars out of Canada. And he's probably going to move his businesses outside of Canada, which is a loss of jobs. That doesn't help the economy, something that Trudeau is also trying to focus on in his time in office. Oh, and just finishing up that story, Manley, a former Liberal finance minister for the Chrétien government, which was something like four prime ministers ago or something like that, said the element of the government's plan to tighten rules on passive investment portfolios and the transfer of family business have created worries to some members of his organizations, the Business Council of Canada. And it said just now that he represents some of the biggest corporations in Canada, so this is not looking good what Trudeau wants to do. Now, some people, including this article out of National Post, seem to think that this is overblown. That everybody is just really making a big deal out of nothing. This is an article that was written on September 6th by Andrew Coyne. And he goes on to say, there are a lot of valid critiques of Finance Minister Bill Morneau's proposal, but these have been lost in cross-country meltdown among doctors and small business owners out of all proportions to any increase in tax they might suffer. Indeed, among the early propaganda triumph in the whole controversy is the notion that the measures in question are in fact aimed at those two groups. Vast clouds of steamy rhetoric have been exhaled on impassioned tributes to their value to the economy, the hardships they endure, and so on, followed by a righteous fury at the manifest injustice of requiring them to pay the same tax as others earning the same or less income. But it isn't about them. It's about incorporation. The changes do not target small businesses or doctors as such, only those who turn themselves into corporations. It is only the small business owners or doctors who incorporate who benefit from special lower tax rates that apply to small businesses, and it is only those small private corporations who privilege tax status the government proposed to trim to whatever small extent. Well, it really doesn't sound like a small extent to me. I mean, the kiddie tax alone could cut off almost 40%. But anyway, the anomaly in the current setup is not just that the owners of small private corporations pay so much less than mere wage earners. It is that they pay so much less in tax than other small businesses and other doctors of equivalent income, the ones who did not incorporate. The former pay less tax than the latter, not because they work harder or take more risks, but solely because they are incorporated. So they seem to think that it's just being incorporated that is going to make a difference. I don't really think that's true because, well, a lot of times when people are freaking out like this, they have good reasons to. And I'm not involved in either farming nor the medical scene, but if we got this many doctors, this many farmers freaking out, it's probably not over nothing. Somehow I doubt they're all missing the point. It makes more sense to me that this one person is missing the point. This Andrew Coyne guy. And it's gotten so bad that on Friday, September 29th, Bill Morneau was in Oakville, Ontario, to give a town hall on these proposed tax changes. And it got bad. There was lots of shouting, and even in his opening statement, he got cut off by somebody who was pissed off and screamed that he kept them waiting for a half an hour. That's probably not a good idea to do to people who are pissed off. So Bill Morneau was in Oakville, Ontario for a small town hall meeting where a question and answer session boiled over more than once into shouting matches. Some were bellowing at Morneau to answer their questions, while others tried to shout them down to let their minister talk. All the while, Morneau's fellow cabinet minister, Karina Gold, tried to maintain calm, even at time was wrapping up, with several people still lined up at the microphone, anxious to give the finance minister a piece of their minds. I wasn't able to download the video in order to put it in here, but in some of the video of the town hall, when people are upset, and they're rightfully upset, some of the people that were with them, because they say here was Karina Gold, which you did see in the video, but there were a few other people up there with Bill Morneau, and some of them started yelling back about how the minister couldn't speak, which is true. He was getting drowned out a lot, although he wasn't saying a lot of good. But the guys he was with had no control. But they have no idea how to deal with an angry crowd, because they're telling them that they can't hear them talk and they don't care, they don't want to hear their comments and this, that, and the other. It's like, true that that's not an effective way to get shit done, but that is not an effective way to calm an angry crowd. If anything, and actually you could tell in the video, it started pissing them off even more. And some of the things that Bill Morneau said were just not smart. Like, one thing he said was, quote, trying to say what we are focused on. I'm certain not going to address the tax policy issue that we may consider after that. You can't do that, end quote. Which, the whole point of taxes is you're looking towards the future, so I think this was kind of a dumb thing to say. He says, we can't address what we're going to do after we apply this. So it's like, well, after we release this. It's like, you kind of can, at least a little bit. And at one point, he just said you wouldn't expect us to come to policy decisions on the fly, because people wanted answers. But a lot of the questions seem to be questions that, being the finance minister and part of this tax proposal, especially for all the flack that he's gotten recently, he should have some answers. But from the reactions people were giving inside the town hall, from what I could tell, he wasn't answering a lot. The Liberal government never really seems to answer a lot of questions. Now, the other problem with this is that there's a lot of accusations getting thrown around, including by the Conservative government, as we can see in some of the question period videos.
The Prime Minister and the Finance Minister are not only helping the wealthy, they're doing it by helping themselves. The Prime Minister said his family fortune will be sheltered from these changes. The Finance Minister has structured the changes so that they won't apply to any company that trades on the stock market, like his billion-dollar family business. So while Ma and Pa in the corner store will pay higher taxes, his billionaire company will not. Why will the bill on Main Street be so much higher than bill on Bay Street?
But they promised to tackle big loopholes for CEOs that cost us hundreds of millions. Not anymore. In fact, on the radio, the finance minister said that issue is not something that we've backed away from. It's just not something we've moved forward on. Come on! Why the Liberals are targeting the little guys and are protecting their wealthy friends of Bay Street?
We can see them start talking about a conflict of interest, which is being raised by this tax proposal. So if we look at this article, it says, John Iveson, accusations Morneau breached conflict of interest, screen raised tensions over tax reforms. And what it says, the late Doug Finley, who was Stephen Harper's backroom general, was asked shortly before the death in May 2013 how to best to sabotage Justin Trudeau, who has recently been elected Liberal leader. Finley proposed the campaign to focus on the Liberal leader's wealth and lack of first-hand experience on the lives of the people he was championing. The suggested payoff line, he's not like you. 4 years and one election defeat later, the Conservatives have finally taken him up on his promise. This is another article by National Post. They have been very defensive of the Liberals, all in all, I would say, and their tax proposal. But they're a lot more left-wing, so it kind of makes sense. But to me, this is actually just focusing on the obvious. They say, well, attack him for his wealth and lack of first-hand experience. Yeah, they're attacking him for his wealth, but that's because he tries to act and relate to the middle class when he's obviously never been part of them. He's been born with a silver spoon in his mouth his entire life. And his lack of first-hand experience, like, the guy's fucking only job before he went into politics was a part-time, like, kindergarten teacher or something like that. Like, he has no first-hand experience with the actual lives of real people. So this is just actually, if anything, just him going after the obvious. Justin Trudeau has that right out in the open, that he's nowhere close to being the common man. Not only is the Prime Minister's family fortune the focus of opposition attacks over the government's proposed tax reforms, but the Finance Minister's wealth is also being contrasted with the struggles faced by mom-and-pop businesses, owners, and farmers, who fear that they will be sideswiped by the proposed changes to private corporations. A new front opened Thursday when the Conservatives raised the issue of conflict of interest. When he became finance minister, Bill Morneau set up a conflict of interest screen with Ethics Commissioner Mary Dawson, quote, to assist with my obligation to abstain from any participation in any matters of decision other than those of a general application relating to Morneau Sheppel, Inc., end quote, where until his election in October 2015, he had been an executive chair. During question period, conservative after conservative pointed out that earlier in the day he was at a meeting with the Finance Committee. Expert testimony had indicated that Morneau Sheppel would be one of the main beneficiaries of the move to increase taxes on passive investments and private corporations. And one of those ministers was Lisa Raitt, and she actually had some seething, stinging words for him. We can take a look at that here.
You know, Mr. Speaker, this past Saturday, I was at the Halifax West High School, where there are over 400 residents crammed into the cafeteria to talk about these tax changes. I listened to their stories, and I actually shared their concerns, and yet I was the only member of Parliament in attendance. That's right, not one, single one of those 32 Atlantic members of Parliament were there to listen or to defend their government policy. So, if their own members of Parliament are not willing to defend this policy, when's the minister going to drop these changes?
We're out listening to people. So I, too, was in Nova Scotia listening to small business owners and professionals. I, too, was in New Brunswick listening to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and we're going to continue listening to them.
He may have gone to Atlantic Canada, Mr. Speaker, but he absolutely did not hear from constituents. Let me give you an example. On the same day that he decided he wasn't going to go to this incredibly large gathering, 400 people, he did have a private, closed-door little session 15 kilometers down the road. And here's the thing about it, Mr. Speaker. When the public tried to get in, you know what they did? They locked the doors.
Locking the doors is not a great idea to appease the public. Moving on with this article, however, it says, quote, the minister said he would recuse himself. Why did he not recuse himself when he proposed so clearly affect his family company, end quote, asked Candace Bergen, the Conservative House leader. Morneau had previously refused to talk about his own finances. He responded to Bergen by saying that taxes affect all Canadians and all businesses, apparently a reference to the general application provision of the conflict of interest screen. He did tell the Globe and Mail that he found it absolutely absurd to suggest that the changes would benefit Morneau Sheppel because its sales of individual pension plans represents less than 1% of its revenue when he was their boss, but is likely a lot more than 1% once the proposal passes through the House. Catherine Ronberg, communication director at Morneau Sheppel, said that since his resignation, the finance minister had no involvement with the company and his shares have been held in a blind trust. Asked how much of the public-owned company is owned by Morneau and his family, Ronberg said the company has no knowledge of whether the blind trust continues to own shares. Oh, really? We have no idea whether he continues to own shares or not, eh? Well, let's take a look right here. If we look on the website of the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, we can see here that this is Bill Morneau's page right now that we're looking at. He's got 5 joint ownerships. He's got a sole business as well. So we're already up to 5, I believe it was. We're already up to 6 businesses that he owes. He receives dividends from them, as well as capital gains income from investments and interest. Even though he sold a lot of his shares for Morneau Sheppel, he still has invested about $32 million of shares in Morneau and Sheppel. So he still has his hand pretty nicely in their pot. And don't forget, he offers individual pension plans. Well, I happened to be browsing Twitter a day or two ago when I saw a tweet from Lisa Raitt that showed this here, which she ended up saying, I understand this was posted in Saskatoon City Hospital. Bill Morneau, nothing like striking when the iron is hot. What is this? Oh, and by the way, the blackout is just the person, and they were tweeting it out to somebody, so I just blacked that out. But what is this? Well, this is a Morneau and Sheppel pamphlet for individual pension plans found in a doctor's lounge. And again, Lisa Raitt said it was posted in a Saskatoon City Hospital. And once again, this company, Morneau and Sheppel, are being singled out as one of the main beneficiaries of the tax change, as well as some of the companies that Trudeau is involved with, but I'm actually going to save the Trudeau Foundation for another video. Right now we're just going to focus on Bill Morneau. So there are already accusations that Bill Morneau is his company that he started up is going to be the main beneficiary of this. He still has millions of dollars invested inside of the company, and now pamphlets for pension plans are showing up in doctors' offices all across the country. Well, I'm adding in the all across the country. But as Lisa Raitt said, nothing like striking while the iron is hot. This, to me, just almost guarantees a conflict of interest. Why would this be in a doctor's lobby right before the tax change? This whole tax change has just been one disaster moving on to the next. Trudeau unwittingly targets the middle class, thinking he's going after rich millionaires, billionaires, or something. This is the sort of thing we've seen in the past. Well, I don't want to sound alarmist, but in past communist countries and areas, we've seen as the government has claimed that the people they helped has turned on them. Now, first off, I'm not at all trying to be alarmist and think we need to be careful because the government's trying to kill us or anything like that. It's just we got to be careful because in the past these sort of things have happened. The people that the government have campaigned for have been the first to be turned on and targeted. And this sort of seems to be what's happening with Trudeau, is he's turning on the middle class, the very people that he said we need to focus on. Now it doesn't seem like it's such a big deal that the people who make just a little bit more to survive and have a nice living are suddenly being taxed to all hell. But just as an example of this, if we look into the past in communist, if we look into the past, Soviet Russia, these sort of things happened. The working class, the labor unions, they were targeted by the government as being unfair. These were some of the problem people. This was after the Russian Revolution. And just to prove what I'm talking about, I'd like to read a couple passages from the Gulag Archipelago, which was all about, written by one man who lived through the gulags themselves, and he ended up writing a book about what was going on. This book was one of the main things that let people know how bad communist Russia really was. So we're starting out mid chapter, and actually the area we're starting out with is a poem. Just a very short one. It's a couple lines long, and then we move on to the actual rest of the writing itself. So, as the poem goes, it says, "With cohesion, construction, grit, and repression, wring the neck of this gang-run riot." I believe this was one poem that was probably used during that time. This was a real poem. This is all based on, this whole book was written based on real evidence, real testimony. This all happened. So I have no doubt that this poem was existing and sung by people or repeated by people of the time. But the reason I put that in is because it falls into line with the next one, with the next line. Who was to be repressed? Whose neck should be wrung? It was then that the so-called Voykov draft began. As always happened when there was an incident of disturbance or tension, they arrested former people, anarchists, socialist revolutionaries, Mensheviks, and also the intelligentsia. The intelligentsia was their intellectual class. It was sort of the people. They were part of the labor class, but these were the intellectuals. So these were the people looked towards to sort of help drive the country towards the future. But it says they arrested them all as such. Indeed, who else was there to arrest in the cities? Certainly not the working class. Oh no? If we skip ahead a page or so, and so it starts off, a new taste has been acquired and a new appetite began to grow. The time had long since arrived to crush the technical intelligentsia, which had come to regard itself as too irreplaceable and had not gotten into catching instructions on the wing. In other words, we never did trust the engineers, and from the very first year of the revolution, we saw to it that those lackeys and servants of former capitalist bosses were kept in line by healthy suspicion and surveillance by the workers. However, during the Reconstruction period, we did permit them to work in our industries, while the whole force of the class assault was directed against the rest of the intelligentsia. This one line here, while I said we permitted them to work on our industries while the whole force of the class assault was directed against the rest of the intelligentsia, I kind of like that because recently there was a tweet put out by Boston Antifa, and it was showing two members of Antifa, a white member of Antifa and a brown-skinned member of Antifa. They were getting into a huge match about. And essentially, I don't know exactly what started off the fight. It started midway through, but they argued. And in the end, the brown Antifa member screamed to the white Antifa member, "You're still a white man. You're still part of the problem."
Do the word. Yeah. Punch a Nazi, stop being performative. I have no idea. Punch a Nazi, stop being performative. Punch a Nazi, stop yelling about it. Be about the shit. You're a white ally.
I'm trying to get it kicked out. I am. I've been fucking fighting for like 3 months. I've put myself at risk of arrest all the time. Somebody threw a fucking megaphone at me. Glasses, hipster!
The performative shit is done! The performative shit is done! Stop outing them! Punch them! Beat their fucking ass if you're an ally! We want to be about the shit! Okay, do it then!
You're pathetic. I was here last night. I fucking fought people all day long. You should write your credentials on a giant board for us.
It doesn't! You're still white! You're still
And this line, when I read it, kind of reminded me of that. It's like we allowed them to work. They worked under. So we permitted them to work under suspicion, while ever we directed the class assault against the rest of them, which kind of seems to me what Antifa does. They permit one group who have admitted their faults and everything, but they're always under the suspicion, and the second they stray, then it seems they'll get turned on. And this seems to be what happened. But turning back to the book, but the more our own economic leadership matured, the VSNKH, which is the Supreme Council of the Economy, and the Gospelin, the State Planning Commission, the more the numbers of plans increased and those plans overlapped and conflicted with one another, the clearer became the old engineers' basic commitment to wrecking, their insincerity, slyness, venality. The sentinel of the revolution narrowed its eyes with even greater vigilance, and wherever it directed its narrow gaze, it immediately discovered a nest of wreckers. Wreckers were people who essentially they'd be labeled as wreckers, and that was because they were willfully trying to disrupt the glorious revolution. Sounds very similar to me the way people will label anybody racist or sexist who doesn't toe the line. In this time, if you didn't toe the line, you were labeled as a wrecker. Now, you are labeled as sexist and racist and anything else transphobic. This therapy continued full speed from 1927 on and immediately exposed to the proletariat all the cause of our economic failures and shortages. There was wrecking in the People's Commissariat of Railroads. That was why it was hard to get aboard a train, why there were interruptions in supplies. There was wrecking in the Moscow electric power system and interruptions in power. There was wrecking in the oil industry, hence the shortage of kerosene. There was wrecking in textiles, hence nothing for a working man to wear. In the coal industry, there was colossal wrecking, hence no heat. In the metallurgy, defense, machinery, shipbuilding, chemical, mining, gold, and platinum industries. In irrigation, everywhere there was pus-filled boils of wrecking. Enemies with sly rules were on all sides. The GPU, the Russian Special Secret Police, essentially, the GPU puffed and panted in their effort to grab off and drag all of the wreckers. In the capitals and in the provinces, GPU collegians and proletariat courts kept hard at work sifting through the vicious sewage, and every day the workers gasped to learn, and sometimes they didn't learn, from the papers of new vile deeds. They learned about Palshimsky, von Meek, and Velinko. We'll cover them in just a second. And how many others who were nameless. Every industry, every factory, and every handicraft artel who had to find a wreckers in its ranks, and no sooner had they begun to look than they had then been found, with the help of the GPU. If any pre-revolutionary engineer was not yet exposed as a traitor, then he would certainly be suspected of being one. It kind of seems to me like the witch hunt. This whole thing kind of seemed like the witch hunt that we're on today about being progressive, how people are not progressive enough. People cannot conform enough. That seems to be the line that a lot of people are pulling these days. And while in this whole book, this would be extreme examples, because these people are getting arrested, hauled off to prison, and eventually killed. We can see how this sort of thing happens in our society. It kind of happens online, I find. If you look on Twitter and things, somebody puts something out, and you can destroy their lives completely online. People will just start blasting them and call them racist, sexist. People will like it. People will retweet it. And it just seems to be a lot of the same, in that everywhere we look, there's another terrible person. There's another Nazi. There's another racist. There's another sexist. Another misogynist. Another this. Another that. It was just the same sort of thing. Wherever they turn their eyes, the regressives turn their eyes, they will find whatever wreckers they're looking for. And now, just going to finish up the last couple passages of this book that'll apply. And what accomplished villains these old engineers were, what diabolical ways to sabotage they found. Nikolai Karlovich von Meek, the People's Commissariat of Railroads, pretended to be terribly devoted to the development of the new economy and would hold forth for hours on end about the economic problems involved in the construction of socialism, and he loved to give advice. On one such pernicious piece of advice was to increase the size of freight trains and not worry about heavier than average loads. The GPU exposed von Meek, and he was shot. His objective had been to wear out rails and roadbeds, freight cars, and locomotives, so as to leave the Republic without railroads in case of foreign military intervention. When, not long afterwards, the new People's Commissar of Railroad, Comrade Kaganovich, ordered that average load should be increased, and even doubled or tripled them, and for this discovery received the Order of Lenin along with others of our leaders, the malicious engineers who protested became known as limiters. They raised the outcry that this was too much and would result in the breakdown of the rolling stock, and they were rightly shot for their lack of faith in the possibility of socialist transport. These limiters were pursued for several years. And that talk about the limiters, what about these limiters? They seem to me the people who were trying to be real, speak fact, and then they were seen as part of the problem against the state, against the revolution. It reminds me very much of the whole gender debate about having something more than 70 different gendered, non-binary gender types. It just reminds me a lot of this whole debate, in that people who point out that your gender is decided by chromosomes and that there is a binary to gender, they're suddenly part of the problem. They need to shut the fuck up. If you ask me, limiters. So while this book would be an extreme example of these, I just see the similarities in our society of what we're trying to do, what Trudeau is doing, what progressives are trying to do. It's very similar. Of course, they're not coming at it in a malicious way. The point is these are mistakes from the past that we are repeating. Even if we're not doing it intentionally, we are still repeating them. We're targeting people because they don't toe the line. We're having witch hunts over everything. We're always constantly looking for people. Some of you may remember a few months ago about this guy, Brett Weinstein, who was a professor at Evergreen College. Now, he got in a lot of trouble because on their thing, they had something called a day of absence, where they wanted all the white people not to show up for that day in order to be in solidarity with what black people and other minorities have been through. He thought it was ridiculous, showed up to school, got called all terrible names, and then he couldn't go back, so now he's filing a lawsuit against the university. Well, people were in gangs looking for him for like the next couple weeks after. There were armed gangs of people with baseball bats and other things going around looking for him. He was even talked about on, I think it was the Joe Rogan podcast, about how there was people going around the parking lot, knocking on doors, trying to figure out where he was. So I'm just seeing, as we're repeating all these mistakes from the past, it just worries me. And this whole tax plan just reminded me when I read that passage from the Gulag a few months ago about how they turned against their own kind, the working class, the middle class, and said that they were the problem. It's like, oh no, these people are actually the problem. This is why we can't get ahead, why you can't get ahead. And that's sort of the same thing Trudeau's doing. He's blaming the middle class, saying they're the rich ones, that's why society is so unfair, when these are some of the people still trying to go through the struggle of life. They're better off than other people. They're better off than I am, but they're being targeted for something that they are not. Alright, moving on from the tax plan. Recently, the Conservatives tried to appoint an opposition member for the status of women, and this has been roadblocked by the Liberal government. Now, what it is, the Conservative leader Andrew Scheer is accusing Liberals of lack of respect for Parliament after a kerfuffle in the Status of Women Committee Tuesday morning. Liberals and New Democrat oppose the Tories' nomination of an apparently pro-life MP for committee chair, a role traditionally held by a member of the official opposition. After Rachel Harder was put forward for the role, the Liberals vacated their seats in protest and forced the committee meeting to adjourn. So we have, I was able to get the audio of what happened in that committee, and things did not last long. But, yeah, let's just take a quick listen to it.
Honorable membres du comité.
Honorable committee members, I see we have quorum.
As the clerk, I can only receive motions for the election of the chair. I cannot receive other types of motions, cannot entertain points of order, nor can I participate in debate. Nous pouvons donc procéder à l'élection à la présidence.
We will now proceed with the election of the chair. Pursuant to Section 106.2, the chair must be a member of the official opposition.
Receive motions for the nomination of the chair. Ms. Vecchio?
I am proud to nominate Rachel Harder, the member from Lethbridge, and also the critic for families, or no, critics for status of women.
Thank you. The Liberal members of the committee cannot support the opposition leader putting forward someone like Rachel Harder, whose voting record is opposed to where women stand, and we cannot support Ms. Harder as chair. We have to leave the meeting.
That was good. Can we have continued comments on this? We no longer have quorum.
Can I call for quorum?
Well, seeing as there is no quorum, this meeting cannot continue.
So if you ask me, it sounds like the Liberals and NDP were triggered by their decision to put Ms. Harder as the head of Status of Women. So as the article goes on to say, it says, how to handle the issue is a test for Scheer, who is trying to keep the big blue tent a safe space for social conservatives and pro-choice conservatives alike. Unlike the Liberals, who mandate pro-choice votes, the Tories allow MPs to vote however they like on issues of conscience, including abortion-related issues. So Scheer ended up saying on Tuesday, he said, quote, it's certainly unprecedented that the Prime Minister would interfere and block the nomination of a democratically elected member of Parliament to serve as chair of the committee. I think it's a show of lack of respect for the parliamentary process. It's very unfortunate. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said during a press conference that the committee is independent and Liberal MPs made their own decision, but he supports them. He said, quote, quite frankly, one would hope that the Committee for the Status of Women would have a spokesperson who would be able to stand up and unequivocally defend women's rights. That's sort of the point of the status for the Women's Committee, end quote. See, this is kind of funny to me because this is a woman who made her decision on abortion, and he's kind of giving her a hard time saying that she's not standing up and defending women's rights. Because in Canada, abortion is considered a woman's right for sure. But this is still, in the end, when you're talking about the Status of Women's Committee, you're talking about putting women in power of themselves. So a woman able to make her own decision and choose to be pro-life seems perfectly okay to me. That seems like, actually, to me, I would say that's the point of the Status of Women Committee. To empower women in themselves to make your own decisions. So he's kind of lecturing her about how you stand up for women, and she is a woman. So I just think that's a little funny, but oh, excuse me, he's a feminist, so that's right. So he's a feminist, so he can tell her how to behave. He goes on to say, what they're protesting, which I wholeheartedly support, is the choice to appoint someone to chair that committee that is so far away from the values that the rest of the committee members hold. End quote. The Status of Women Minister Mariam Mosef said outside of the chamber. Well, then they're supporting that their members walked out with no debate, no dialogue. They just got up and get out and walk out. I find that the reason I don't find this acceptable is because These are our lawmakers. Protesting shouldn't be done during Parliament time. It should be done after. This is a time when they should be debating this and saying, well, we don't like this because we don't feel she represents, she's not going to defend women's rights. That is the perfect time to do that, but instead all these MPs just stand up and walk out like children. No, like fucking university students who just heard something that they don't like. They're like, I'm leaving. Fuck you. That's pretty much what our adult MPs, our lawmakers, just did. And doing this just grinds Parliament to a halt. You can't do anything if every time you can't get anything done if every time somebody gets elected you don't like, or something that happens you don't like, you just get up and walk out. So moving on in the article, it says, Andrew Scheer would like us to believe that his style of leadership is an inclusive one, a positive one where gender equality matters, and yet he continues to send signals like this that go against the face of what the women movement has been saying for decades. The Liberals' protest came after New Democrat critic Sheila Malcolmson raised concern over Harder's nomination Monday. Malcolmson said Tuesday that Liberals had originally been telling her there's nothing we can do, but after their surprise move, she was very glad to see that they felt the pressure from women organizations across the country. Malcolmson said that she doesn't think having pro-life views is problematic for Harder as a parliamentarian, but a committee member focused on women's issues should ensure its chair and spokesperson is someone who supports reproductive rights. No, it should just be a woman who supports... It should just be a person who supports women. I mean, abortion is a completely legal thing in Canada, and Andrew Scheer said he's not going to open up voting on that subject again. So having a pro-life at the head of the status of women is almost meaningless. And to think that this woman, because she's pro-life, is not going to fight for women is stupid. It'd be completely counterproductive for herself and her children and her family. Why would she do that? And in turn, if we look up the abortion stats between women, while more women do support an ability to have abortion, not all women do. In stats I could find, only about 59, so roughly 60% of women say it should be legal in all cases. So that leaves about roughly 40% of women who say that it should be illegal, like not be allowed, who are pro-life. So that's still a pretty big number. So you can't just write that off then and say that, well, because this woman, Rachel Harder, is pro-life, that suddenly she can't stand up for women, because actually there's still a lot of women out there that would say that she stands up for them. So it's roughly about the same, but it does fluctuate. As I've noticed, as I was looking through the rest of the stats, it does tend to fluctuate over the years. Sometimes there'll be a more pro-choice. Not more pro-choice, but I mean they'll be closer together. It'll be something like, well, we can even see it was in one of these ones, it said that at one point they were only a few percentage points off from each other. So it does fluctuate, but more women seem to prefer prefer the pro-choice point of view. But there's still a large percentage of that believes in the pro-choice movement. So one thing that Harder's getting hit by is that her voting record has been deemed impeccable by pro-life group Campaign Life Coalition. A representative from the coalition spoke to the Post in August and endorsed Harder's appointment as status of women critic, saying there is a bias of abortion in Canada politics and is not representative of all women's view in Canada. Harder replied yes in 2014 to her group's questions about whether she believed life begins at conception, about introducing laws to protect fetuses. She told the Post in a statement last month, though, it is official policy of the Conservative Party that the future Conservative government will not reopen the abortion debate. And then once again, we turn back to Lisa Raitt, where whoever seems to be bringing her stinging wit with her whenever it concerns Justin Trudeau and his Liberals, said, "It is hypocritical for the government to think she can't put her views aside. The way Trudeau asked some of his members of his caucus to do this issue when he became leader, because now he tells everybody they have to vote pro-choice regardless." Lisa Raitt, the Conservatives' deputy leader, said outside the House she'd hope a discussion could have gone ahead in the meeting room Tuesday morning so the committee could begin its work. Raitt added she believes Harder's personal beliefs wouldn't preempt her from being able to act in an impartial chair. Quote, "When the government says Rachel Harder can't be the chair of this committee, what they're saying is they don't trust her to put her personal beliefs aside. They don't give her the benefit of the doubt." Conservative MP Michelle Rempel accused Liberals of hypocrisy with a series of tweets, presupposing the thought and ability of a democratically elected MP to be impartial simply based on political dogma, and then seeking to suppress her is hilarious coming from the supposed free-thinking feminists, she wrote. Advocacy groups on both sides of the issue are weighing in on whether to condemn or applaud the Liberals' move. With pro-life groups, We Need a Law, saying dissenting voices are feared and silenced, and pro-choice groups, Abortion Rights Coalition in Canada, calling for pressure of Liberal MPs and saying being anti-choice should be an automatic disqualifier. Neither side appears to be ready to back down. Committee members face each other again Thursday morning. Well, should be an automatic disqualifier. That's kind of dumb because that's a lot more hardline position than the pro-life position. And then once again on the question period, at the end of question period, from it was either the 26th or 27th of that I have up there. I believe it was the 27th. One Liberal MP ended up bringing this up again, and we can see what happens.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Vice Chair of the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women. As she will know, today the committee was unable to elect a chair. Can the Vice Chair inform the House of the agenda of the committee going forward, considering this new development?
Leader of the official opposition put forward the member for Lethbridge as the Conservative nominee as Chair of the Status of Women Committee. Someone who does not support a woman's right to choose. We believe that a committee as important as ours needs to be chaired by an individual
The Honourable Vice Chair has the floor.
We believe that a committee as important as ours needs to be chaired by an individual who will protect and advance women's rights. I hope the Leader of the official opposition will reconsider and put forward someone who believes in those...
Order, order. Order. Members are complaining about what the member is saying, but I can't possibly hear it without the yelling.
It seems to me that the Conservatives are much more united around their people, because that chorus of applause and cheering that came after that they stuck with Rachel Harder as their nomination shows a lot of unity in the Conservative Party. I find there's a lot more there than in any of the other parties right now. All right. And we're going to move on to the final point. And what this was is during question period, Tom Mulcair started ripping into Justin Trudeau. This is another guy that's really good at tearing Trudeau apart. And after going after the Prime Minister about his torture and his use of information through torture, he ended up making a curious point, which I have the video right here.
How can the Prime Minister stand in this place and defend the use of information obtained by torture?
Contrary, Mr. Speaker, torture is prohibited by the Criminal Code. It's against the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It's condemned by the international community, and it's abhorrent to Canadian values.
What did the Lobbying Commissioner, the Official Languages Commissioner, and the Ethics Commissioner have in common? All three started investigations on the Prime Minister, and all three are now looking for a new job. The government has spent more than $2 million looking for new commissioners, and all that was put forward was the botched appointment of a partisan Liberal. What's the real reason? Is it possible that they want lapdogs instead of watchdogs?
The Ethics Commissioner launched an investigation into the Prime Minister's private billionaire island vacation, coming up on a year since the Lobbying Commissioner began looking into Liberal fundraisers hosted by the head of pharmaceutical giant Apotex. And by the way, we just learned that Apotex is suing the Lobbying Commissioner to stop that investigation. It's hard to keep track of all these scandals, Mr. Speaker. My question to the Prime Minister is, what the heck happened? What happened to his promise of respect for Parliament and empowering the independent officers? They say power corrupts, but boy, this was awful fast, Mr. Speaker.
He ends up talking about how 3 commissioners ended up getting fired underneath Justin Trudeau after being investigated. So, as we look through these articles, it says they talk about being under investigation from, first one was from the Ethics Commissioner. What ended up happening was last December, Justin Trudeau took a fancy vacation to the Bahama Islands on a privately owned island by his friend Aga Khan. And the current commissioner, well, the former, but at the time, the current commissioner was Mary Dawson. And she launched 2 investigations into Trudeau's vacation, in which he and his family used the Aga Khan's private helicopter to fly to and from Nassau. Under the Conflict of Interest Act, the Prime Minister, Cabinet Ministers, and Parliamentarian Secretaries are prohibited from accepting free travel or charter or private aircraft without getting advance approval from the Ethics Commission. Public office holders are prohibited from accepting gifts from anyone who has business dealings with the government, although there are exceptions if the person is a friend. And that's something Justin Trudeau claims, that this guy has been a childhood friend. Dawson's term as Ethics Commissioner had been extended twice by the Liberal government and is due to expire on July 8th. She said she won't seek reappointment. NDP ethics critic Nathan Coulin said putting Jagger in charge of finding Dawson's successor is akin to asking an employee to appoint someone to investigate his or her boss. The conflict of interest still remains. So that's what he was just talking about in terms of the commissioners, in the Ethics Commissioner. And then we move on to the Language Commissioner. So Conservatives and New Democrats are trying to block a former Ontario Liberal cabinet minister from being appointed as Commissioner of Official Languages, saying the PM ignored his legal obligation to consult with opposition leader before announcing Madeleine Meilleur as his nominee. Both the Tories and NDPs have complained about the partisan and liberal background of Ms. Meilleur, who as an officer of Parliament would be expected to operate independently of the government and would report directly to the House of Commons or the Senate. Tom Mulcair, the NDP leader, questioned why Mr. Trudeau, who has been trying to purge the Senate of partisans, would nominate someone who has been a prominent Liberal politician to an office that requires independence. The NDP leader recalled that Mr. Trudeau was the subject of an investigation this year by the Office of Language Commission after he insisted on speaking only French during a stop in Sherbrooke, Quebec, even when he was asked the question in English, which we have a video right here.
Funding for psychiatry and mental health services have been grossly underfunded compared to the other areas of health care. Of particular concern in this area are services to minority populations. Most of the public services in this area are available in French only. It is only in the last 10 years that we have had a group dedicated to trying to help the English population in this area. I would really appreciate your comments on this subject.
Merci. Thank you. Si vous permettez, je vais répondre en français pour que tout le monde puisse entendre. Mais merci de votre utilisation de nos 2 langues officielles au pays. Mais on est au Québec, donc je vais répondre en français.
Yeah, we all remember that incident. That was just obnoxious as shit. But anyway, that's what he was under investigation for there. And then they don't have a job anymore. And then finally, Mulcair calls it suspicious Trudeau won't recuse himself from lobbying commissioner's hiring process. So he's calling on him to recuse from the next lobbying commissioner because the current one is investigating two cash for access fundraiser organized by the Prime Minister by wealthy lobbyists. Quote, "It is suspicious that Justin Trudeau won't recuse himself from the significant decision," said Mulcair, especially after he has shown himself unable to separate partisan politics from the important appointments, end quote. Last week, which was July 17th, so a few months ago, Post Media reported that lobbying commissioner Karen Shepherd is still investigating an August 2015 fundraiser held for Trudeau by billionaire Barry Sherman, the chairman of the pharmaceutical giant Apotex, as well as an August 2014 fundraiser held by Trudeau by Clearwater Seafood co-founder Mikey McDonald. McDonald is a powerful businessman in Atlantic Canada. At the time of the fundraiser, he said, "It's a small price to pay for a long-time benefits that we'll receive." Sherman has a net worth of $4.62 billion, according to the Canadian Business Magazine, making him Canada's 14th richest person. Both Apotex and Clearwater are registered to lobby the Prime Minister's office. In May, Trudeau recused himself from involvement in the hiring of the next ethics commissioner, citing her ongoing investigation into his trip of the private island of the billionaire Aga Khan. The Prime Minister's office has said Trudeau needn't recuse himself from the matters of the lobbying commissioner. However, because Trudeau himself is not the subject of Shepherd's two investigations, Trudeau has also resisted attempts to change how federal watchdogs are selected, which is another concern for Mulcair. This is why I'm going to miss Tom Mulcair. I really like Tom Mulcair, actually, because he's always been good at calling others out. Now, I really like Andrew Scheer for that. Like, Andrew Scheer as opposition during question period is awesome. Although, when it comes to actually the voting time, I don't know if I'd actually want to vote him in. Tom Mulcair is almost out. He only has maybe another month left. I believe it's by the end of October is when the new NDP leader will be announced. So I'm going to miss this guy because he's always been great at calling out Justin Trudeau and others. And personally, I thought he was a good center-left politician. I didn't find he was super progressive left, even if a lot of the rest of the party were. So those are your 3 political stories today. So today was a lot of reading, a lot of technical stuff, so it might not be the most interesting episode, but these are all important things to do in politics. I mean, Trudeau's tax plan is causing an uproar amongst Canadians. The way that the cabinet reacted to the appointment of the status of women just shows how they're unwilling to debate, listen, talk whatsoever. And then we have Mulcair forever calling out Justin Trudeau's bullshit. I'm going to miss that guy. But anyway, I want to thank you for joining me on the podcast today. I'm Adrian Lloyd. This is just my stupid opinion. I'll see you soon.
You profit